So,
Right. So thank you,
hello.
Jacob, for being here. Go ahead and get started. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. I just kind of wanted to touch base. I'm Jacob Robinson. This will be my third year at Sunshine Community Garden, and I thought it'd be nice to do kind of a seed starting class. It is getting into that season where it is well time to start seeds to get them, so you can have full grown plants ready to be put into the ground. Well, not full grown, but healthy plants to put into the ground and hit the ground running come planting day. So, starting seeds is pretty straightforward. At the core of it, you get soil of some kind or soilless mix, and you put a seed in it, you keep it moist, and it sprouts. That being said, there is some nuance to getting a healthy plant, and some equipment is required, unfortunately. So some basic things that are required, and I apologize for the camera angle that is cutting off half my head, is a grow light. So this is a little LED grow light. You can get them on Amazon. This is about the cheapest one I know of, and they work extremely well. You can fit at least five plants underneath it, which is plenty for quite a few of the raised beds. If you want more, you probably need to get more of these lights, but these are, they are the classic purple grow light. And for many seasons, I've used these, or I have three of them now to start all my seedlings. And these have been great. They're made by this manufacturer, and they are generally the cheapest. So I don't want to try to pronounce that. So they're generally about $30. The other ones you can find are what are called T5 bulbs, and they look like fluorescent lights. I've not had as good as luck with using that type of light versus a small LED panel like this. So the second thing you need is kind of a growing medium, a potting soil or some sort of soil. I would just recommend getting a seed starting mix. I would stay away from those little peat pellets. They tend to hold on to a little bit too much moisture for my liking. So I prefer just like a seed starting mix with no nutrients in it whatsoever. Once the plant has its first true leaves, which I'll get into in a minute, you can start lightly fertilizing your sprouts. That way, you can help give them some of the nutrients the plants need when you water. But otherwise, and when you go to repot the seedling, you want to actually then get a sort of potting soil, something with some nutrients in it. Try to stay away from Miracle-Gro. They tend to put like little plastic pellets in their stuff, and sometimes you'll find even the really, really cheap potting soil will have like bits of styrofoam in it. I would stay away from that stuff. What you want in it is, this is a soilless blend I use, and it's just a blend of like coco coir, I think some peat, and the white specks are perlite. This is kind of what you want. I've had really good luck with this. And then obviously if you're starting seeds inside, you need pots. So they sell these in like little 72 tray flats. There's a bunch of these all linked together. These are great. You can actually reuse them. I've already started a bunch of seeds in these and tossed them in some 10% bleach water and let them soak overnight, rinsed them off, and you're good to go and use these again. And typically you'll find them paired with a big dome. And these do work extremely well, especially when you have a grow light on top of them. They generate, there's enough heat in here that you don't generally need a heating pad. A heating pad is something you'll also see a lot. And if you're doing like kale and tomatoes and stuff like that, you really don't need one. You only need a heating pad if you get like super temperamental, like tropical peppers, which I'm not going to get into because we're a little out of the window to start those types of plants. And then for repotting, you can either use, depending on what you're growing, if you're doing like some seeds for like an herb or kale, or something that doesn't need to get very big before you put it in the ground, a little 2-inch pot like this is great. For tomatoes, these 4-inch guys are excellent. And once again, you can use if you keep them in decent shape, you can bleach them and then use them again the next year. The reason I recommend bleaching them is, even though the manufacturers try their best, there is a chance that you might have a diseased plant in your seeds. And you want to make sure to kill any viruses, especially with tomatoes. Tomatoes are particularly notorious for viruses. That's why we don't compost them. So toss these in bleach if you've used them the year before, or if you buy some plants at Home Depot, you can save and reuse those pots for the next year. I got these 4-inch ones at Ector's for like 50 cents a piece. So, they're not overly expensive. And I like these for tomatoes because you can get a nice, big, healthy plant ready to put into the ground, the really healthy root system in one of these pots. And you can, and I have transplanted a tiny seedling straight into this pot, and it generally does fine. So seeds. Seeds have been a bit hard to come by this season already. I would check, like, I just picked some tomato seeds up at a Natural Grocers. They had their little seed rack stuffed in a corner. The only reason they had tomato seeds. I know when I was getting my seeds at Ector's a couple weeks ago, tomatoes were already picked through pretty bad. They still had plenty of kale and carrots and green beans and all those things, but their tomatoes specifically were picked through. So I know the garden has some seeds available. So, you might want to reach out and see if we can't get some packets of seeds. We have a decent selection of a bunch of different tomatoes, and that's mostly what I kind of focus on for the purposes of this talk. So what can you start from seed? So there are some plants that you can't start from seed, and there's some plants that you have to start from seed, or go to the hardware store and buy a seedling. So kale, whenever you're starting from seed, they'll have the info you need on the back of the packet. Kale, you can either direct sow before the last chance of last frost. They're pretty cold hardy. So are most brassicas, cabbage, kohlrabi, broccoli, all of those types of plants generally do okay in the cold, and you can direct sow them. But starting from seed is also extremely worthwhile and effective on these. And kale is a good example of something I put in this little pot. Another one, of course, you've got your herbs like basil. You can start these from seeds, and you can pretty much start them year round because you don't really need a grow light for something like basil. A sunny window is off. If you got a really sunny spot in your house, it can get enough light, and you can have fresh basil year round. And then, of course, you've got your, chili peppers. Like I said, these need about 8 to 12 weeks before the last frost. And so we're just, assuming a mid-May, a 1st of June planting date, you would want to start these now. If you wait another week or two, they're going to just be too small to really get a good crop from them. For reference, I tend to be a little overzealous, and I started mine back in January, but I want full-size plants put in the ground because I'm mental. And then the most obvious one, and my favorite to start from seed, are tomatoes. These do great from seed. You need to start them about 4 to 6 weeks before you want to put them outside, before the last frost date. And yeah, these are excellent to start from seed. They do super well. And they're pretty robust growing plants. So that being said, you do have 2 different kinds of tomatoes. You've got your indeterminate variety, like Cherokee Purple here, which I have, is an indeterminate variety. It means that the tomato will just keep growing throughout the season and will just get bigger and bigger and bigger until it's so big you don't know what to do with the plant because it's 7 feet tall. That's a pretty, pretty typical thing. And then you have your determinate tomatoes. And I didn't grab a pack of one here, but tomatoes like your Romas are called a determinate variety. The plant only gets, 2 to 3 feet in size, and then it just starts producing as many tomatoes as it possibly can all at once. Where Cherokee purples will just produce them throughout the season. Hothouse tomatoes are often determinate varieties or indeterminate varieties because they can just keep that plant growing more or less for years and just keep getting tomatoes from it. They die here because of the frost. But if you have a raised bed and you want to plant more than 3 tomato plants in it, I would recommend going more of a Roma or indeterminate tomato route. There'll be more smaller, more manageable plants that actually tomato cages will work for. Putting a Cherokee purple in a tomato cage is not, that tomato cage will fall over, and it'll just, the plant will just kind of eat the tomato cage, and it's just going to become a wild bush. So speaking from experience, and I might do a trellising workshop later in the season to teach people hopefully how to better trellis their plants. And the other one, you can start from seeds, of course, your lettuce, your herbs. Onions, you can actually start from seed, although we're way outside the window now. And so I would highly recommend just, buying onion sets and planting those in your plot. If you want onions, you need to give, almost 3 months for the onion set to grow from seed, which once again, I started some back in January because I had onion seeds. I wanted to try to grow my own onion set. So the other thing you need is, room. All these little pots take up space. So if you're in a really tiny apartment, you can start, 4 or 5 plants easily enough, but I don't recommend getting a big 72 well tray because they get out of hand really quickly. And, when you go from a little 1-inch well to a 4-inch well, you're talking a lot of space is eaten up suddenly by plants and pots. So some things you do not want to start from seed and are beans. So green beans, bush, or pole, the roots are too sensitive and they do not handle transplanting. Plus, these grow fast enough where you can get an extremely healthy, good crop of green beans by just sticking the bean seed straight into the soil. I canned at least 18 jars of green beans, including green bean pickles, from a bag of seeds in my plot, just interspersed among everything else. So you don't have to start green beans from seeds. Snap peas don't handle transplanting very well. And once again, those grow fast enough where if you have a tomato cage for them to crawl up and trellis, you'll get a very healthy green bean crop or a pea crop earlier in the season. And those are something that, peas, I would recommend you start pretty early. Like you can start those well before the last frost date, and you can, because they're a cool season crop. As soon as it hits like those 98, 100-degree days, the peas will just kind of die and stop producing. So those are kind of more of an early season thing. You can just direct sow in the ground. Carrots, once again, just straight put the seeds in the ground and call it a day. You don't really want to try to transplant carrots. And then the other one I see a lot of, and I see the plants for sale at Home Depot, often in those little peat pots, are squash. Squash, you can, as long as you get them in the ground as soon as you're planting your garden, you can get plenty of squash by direct sowing it. You don't have to start that from seed. If you do start from seed, you want to start like only 1 to 2 weeks before you would plant it outside. and you'd want to use a peat pot because you don't want to disturb the roots when you're trying to transplant your squash plant. The same thing goes for watermelons and cucumbers. Anything in that family, squash or cucumber, this includes your summer squash like your zucchini, crooknecks, patty pans, pumpkins, these big pink banana squash that I plan on growing. All of those, you just stick the seed in the soil straight out in your garden plot, and you'll get more than enough squash. Once again, if you're in a raised bed, you might only want to just put one seed in because that squash plant will eat your entire raised bed. They tend to go a little bit wild. So as far as, seeds, that I know that was a lot of information, but, quite a few things to summarize, things like tomatoes and peppers do great starting from seed, but other things like squash, just put it in the ground. When planting day rolls around, just plant a couple, call it a day. So, all right, I've got a couple, I've got a couple seeds I was going to plant and a couple things that I've found have been really helpful. So I have just my dry mix in a bucket here. It's just dry soil. And so I'm going to add some water to it before I put it in my pots. Because if you put the dry soil in your pots, when you go to water it, it's going to lose a tremendous amount of volume, which means all of a sudden you've got a lot less volume for your little new seedlings roots to grow. And it might be a little harder to negotiate the small seedling out of a pot to transplant. So this is just pure, this is just tap water. Not tap, I filtered it because I don't want to try not to use chlorinated water when you're doing seeds from scratch. So I'm just gonna mix this around a bit until it forms. The soil is damp, but not like, and the soil is wet, but you can't bring moisture out of it. You don't want it sopping. You just want it like nice and moist where it clumps up and is kind of springy, but not so much so it's just like absolutely sopping wet. So down in the soil, I put in about 8 cups of water. Now this is extremely dry soil because it's been open a while. Some potting soils, when you open them, might be fairly moist inside. So, just kind of add water as needed and just, mix it really thoroughly. And I find, a bucket, once again, works really well for this. Sorry, I know you can't, you're just seeing me a bucket right now. So, but, oh yeah, this is perfect. So you see how, all right, see how this clumps up and you might get a few drops of moisture coming out. I don't know if you can see that, but it's still clumpy, but it's not like oversaturated. You can form a nice little ball out of it and it holds its shape, but it's not like absolutely oversaturated with moisture. And so now just kind of, I'm doing this in a tub to try to keep the cat tracks to a minimum. My cat loves to watch me plant stuff and watch me water the plants, and I have no idea why. But so I'm tamping the soil down lightly where it'll still spring up a little bit, but you don't want it to be super duper loose because then it gives, sorry, I know this is hard to negotiate. So, I just kind of pack it down lightly where you've got plenty of soil in here for the seedling, but you don't have, it's not super airy. It's not going to compact a bunch when you go to water it. And yeah, that's that. So that's a nice, like, healthy amount of soil in there. Like I said, not too compact. So I'm going to go ahead and plant some Cherokee purples. This is one variety that I've loved to continuously grow. So as far as saving seeds, year to year goes, there are certainly some things that if you go to seed, like arugula is a great example. You can save those seeds and grow them again next year. I don't recommend doing that with tomatoes, mostly because they have a lot of viruses and virus issues. And I've had quite a few issues out at the garden with losing plants to viruses and other diseases, and they can be transferred year to year from the seeds. So if you accidentally use an infected tomato plant, all of your tomatoes, that variety and everything else might get that virus. So I recommend, a packet of tomato seeds can last multiple seasons. So, seeds don't just magically die after 1 year. So, I don't know if you can see these. They are super tiny. So I would honestly also recommend using like a bamboo skewer or a pair of tweezers. I'm a big fan of tweezers. I just forgot to grab them. So, and I'm putting 2 seeds in per little tray here. You can do just 1 seed per tray. That way you're not wasting excessive amounts of seeds, because generally speaking, if they're fresh seeds, they're going to be, you're going to get plenty of them to sprout. So I'm just going to do that. I've just did 3, and for these guys, they say to put a 1/4 inch deep, which isn't very deep. So it's just, kind of put them in a little divot and then push some soil over the top. I will try to get a better angle of that and do it again to show you guys. I think that'll work. So I just kind of make a little divot. Kind of probably hard to see, but you can see a little divot there in this end one. Carrot seeds are an absolute nightmare. They are so tiny. And then, just kind of drop the seeds in and then just cover it up, lightly tamp it down, and then keep these guys moist. And I would put them immediately under the light so the soil gets kind of warm with the big dome over them. Those big trays, they also make versions that are only 12 wells wide, so you don't have to deal with the big 72 well if you don't have to. But these, that's how you start it. Just keep these nice and wet, keep them damp, keep them moist, and in 2 or 3 days, you might start seeing something sprout. I started these guys about a week ago, and so, got little tiny tomato plants. And you can see they're starting to get their first, what are called their true leaves here. There we go. So you can see right here are their first true leaves. Don't know if my camera's picking that up well, but yeah. And so once those leaves are a bit bigger, you can go ahead and transplant this guy. These guys look a little funny back here because the seed got stuck pinching the leaves together. They'll be perfectly healthy, full-grown tomato plants later on. And then, so I've also got some tomatillos here. And this guy is big enough here, this little one, big enough. I'm pretty sure I can be gentle enough to show you how to transplant this little guy. I don't recommend trying to transplant, the seedlings this small. You might want to let those true leaves develop a little more, maybe even let them get a second set before you transplant. But I didn't quite get these set soon enough to have bigger plants going when I was trying to balance it too. I don't want a whole massive tomatillo I have to dig a big old hole for when I go to transplant it. So let me go ahead and just kind of fill one of my 4-inch pots up. Kind of similar story, fill it up. And these take a fair bit of soil, kind of tamp it down a little bit. So, so you kind of get a good idea of what I'm doing. I'm just kind of tamping it down. It's nice and full. It's not too compact. Let me move my bucket out of the way. So now what I do is I make a nice big hole. Make a nice big hole. And then these, you don't want to just kind of pull the plant out by the stalk. You want to be very gentle with it, kind of turn it on the side. I am not grabbing the plant. I am supporting the soil with my fingers. So turn it upside down. You'll probably see a bunch of soil fall away. Oh, you got some roots sticking out right there. That's fine. That's okay. That happens. Not a big deal. And then drop him in, cover him up, tamp him down. The other reason I like to have wet soil, moist soil when I'm doing this is so the seedling has some moisture, because they're really sensitive when they're this big, this small. The seedling has some moisture, has some water. You're not going to suddenly shock it by putting in the dry soil. Just realized I forgot to do something to that, because so this blend here is got no nutrients in it. And so I should have, before I did that, I use this stuff. This is pretty, this has been excellent this year. So since I'm using a blend of soil that doesn't have any nutrients or fertilizer already added to it, I'll add a scoop of this per the manufacturer's recommendations. That way the small plant has some nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. This is a 334 or a 343. So it's fertilizer, which is plenty strong enough for this little guy. And, I'd let him grow for 2-3 weeks, and then you can hit him with some liquid fertilizer. It can be really, even the descented version can have a bit of an aroma, but I highly recommend fish emulsion fertilizer. I use it out at the garden all the time. When you've got little seedlings like this, a healthy amount of nitrogen, higher nitrogen fertilizer, especially a liquid kind, is generally a little better. If you want to fertilize these little guys, and these are just, I'd let them get a little bit bigger before I did fertilize them. Hit them with half strength. And so I would do, if it says, 2 tablespoons per gallon, I'd only do 1 tablespoon per gallon. And I wouldn't pour it directly in the soil. I would pour it into the bottom of the tray for it to soak up from the holes on the bottom down here, which I don't know if, yeah, you got little slits down here. The soil will wick up, that will wick up through. That way you're still giving your small plants some nutrients, but you don't risk burning them or shocking them with too strong a fertilizer. I would probably hold off another week before I did it, just due to this little tiny guy. It's getting going. It's going to be a big healthy plant before it's done, but it's just having a bit of a hard time. I planted 6. I only want 2. So I have plenty of extras if this one doesn't make it. That's why I planted 6. Always plant 1 or 2 extras, and if they all survive, that's great. And then give some to your neighbor. I will have quite a few plants to give to my neighbors, because I might have been a little overzealous like I do every year. Last count was 84 pepper plants. Like I said, I went a little overboard. So, I also have the space to do it. So that's the other big thing is, if you have the space to start a bunch of plants and you have a big 12 by 12 and you want to, start a significant number of plants, you have a little office room or something where you can just put a tarp down or something, hang a bunch of little, those panels or some other bigger grow lights, go for it. But it does take up a significant amount of space. And after I'm done with the electricity bill with using one of those big grow lights, I probably am breaking even versus just using a panel like this, which won't really rack up your electricity bill appreciably. So now that you have a plant, you don't want to leave it under the lights for 24 hours a day. I generally do 14 to 18 hours of light. That's why a window for something like a tomatillo isn't enough. It needs a good 12 hours of direct light to become a nice, big, healthy plant. And then I will also have a fan in the room kind of blowing across the plants so nobody gets too leggy. Like this guy here, this guy's a bit leggy. You see how kind of lanky and tall he is. And if you have like this real big, long, scraggly tomato that's just like reaching for the light, lower the light down and put a fan on it. So it makes for a stronger plant because it's mimicking that airflow. So yeah. And then I guess the last thing to cover is, if you once you have a nice big full grown, or not full grown, healthy plant, you don't want to just stick it outside. You need to do what's called hardening off, where the first day you put it outside in the shade for like an hour, second day maybe an hour in direct sunlight, and then day after that 2 hours. You can, if you're home in the evenings is great, but you kind of want to slowly, over the course of a couple of days to a week, acclimate your plant to being outside. The sunlight is a lot more intense than a grow light, and while you won't kill the plant by just sticking it straight outside, it will stunt it a little bit and delay its growth because it'll get a little more unhappy. So that's kind of starting seeds in a very quick nutshell. There's a lot of different products out there. Like I said, I would just get a straight soilless mix or a seed starting mix, not the little peat pellets. They tend to be too wet and you can mold your seeds. The seeds need that not too wet, not too dry, happy medium kind of Goldilocks zone. That's why I like to have nice damp soil, but not sopping wet. You don't want sopping wet soil around your seeds. You want damp soil. Trying to think if there's anything else. I guess at this point, I'll open it up to questions. I don't really have much else to kind of go over. I've kind of hit the broad brush strokes of starting seeds.
Thank you, Jacob. I definitely have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned with the fertilizer that you water into the tray. Do you do the same when you're watering them versus watering on the tops of them?
Depends on the size of the plant. If it's a little seedling in one of the trays, I will only ever put the water in the tray. And a lot of those trays have vents on top. And so you want to keep kind of the vents closed when you're first starting to lock in a lot of the moisture. And then once you start to get plants to pop up, you'll want to open them up more and more over time. And eventually when they're big enough, just pull that cover straight off. That way they can start to dry out a little bit and they don't stay super wet. So when they're super small, put the soil, put the water or the fertilizer in the tray. Once they're bigger and a little more robust, or once they're in, your 4-inch pot, you can go right on ahead and just kind of pour water straight into the pots and it'll be just fine. You'll still see some holes, water will form little channels and whatnot. So I recommend using some sort of tote or tub to put your plants in. That way you're not getting water and dirty water everywhere. And I also recommend putting it in a place where your pet won't mess with it. Whether dog or cat, I've had my cat just randomly walk up to my seedlings and pull one out. No idea why. No idea why she did that. I found it pretty quick and I put it back in. It survived just fine.
I had another question about just transplanting those tomatoes. That tomato you transplanted looked really small. And so generally, how many weeks after it sprouts? I mean, you said it was a little small. Generally, when do you need to transplant those tomatoes into something a little bit bigger?
For my peppers, tomato, this was a tomatillo. I don't know about tomatillos. They said 8 to 10 weeks, so I got these going a little sooner. Tomatoes, now that they're first showing their true leaves, I would say in about 2 weeks. So maybe 3 weeks total in the small tray. If you pick up the tray and you see these long roots hanging out of the bottom, that's a good sign to transplant. And if you're really careful, you can actually thread those roots up through the hole and not rip them off. If they get ripped off a little bit, tomatoes aren't too mad about losing a few roots here or there, so it'll be fine. You definitely want to do it before they get fully root bound. When you pull a plant out of the pot and it just looks like just a mass ball of roots and you don't have any soil falling out, I call that root bound, and that you've waited too long. So I'd say once the seed comes up, probably 2 weeks to 3 weeks. So once it has probably a second set of its true leaves, then it's plenty big enough to transplant. But you can also go tiny if you need to. So. But you just want to, no matter what, you don't want to grab the plant by its stem. You want to just, kind of nestle it between your fingers and support the soil and the roots. That way you're not putting excessive force on the little plant.
Perfect. I'm also wondering, can you talk about just like the age of seeds? Like I know it's great to buy seeds from this season, but how do you know how old is too old?
I've put jalapeno seeds in the ground that have been over 5 years old and they've sprouted just fine. The viability of seeds just kind of slowly tapers off with time. So if you have some really old seeds, rather than putting 2 per pot, maybe put 3 or 4. But I've had seed packs, now it varies by plant. Old bean seeds might not stay viable as long as you want fresher beans. Squash, I've had good luck with planting, quite a few older squash seeds. And then tomatoes, they do great 3, 4, 5 years old. So do peppers. 3, 4, 5 years old, you can still put them in the ground just fine.
Thank you. Also, I'm wondering, you talked about kind of how close the light was to the seedling. In general, how close do you want that light to either the lid, the dome, or once you take the dome off, how close do you want it to that seedling?
Yeah, so it depends on the size of the dome. So I have a pretty big dome here, and I will put the light more or less on top of the dome. And then when I pull the dome off, I'll keep the light at the same level. And if you notice some starting to stretch up towards the light, drop a little bit, but you don't want it too close because the leaves will get burnt. And so I know with T5s, for example, the fluorescent, tube style lights, those need to be almost on top of your plants. Those need to be 1 to 2 inches from the top of the plant. The LED panel, I do 3 to 4 inches above the plant at minimum. And then the big grow lights where I'm running in my spare room, I have those several feet above the plant because they get hot.
Are there any other questions?
I had a question, yeah, about
Mhm.
this is awesome. So much great information, Jacob. I was curious about, can you just talk again about like kind of the nutrients and when you use them versus when you don't?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So
Thank-
when I'm doing seeds straight in the soil, I don't put nutrients because I don't want to burn the seed. The seed itself has enough nutrients in to get a little plant to form. And then once you go, once you've got your smaller plants and they're starting to show their true leaves, water with half strength fertilizer, something like fish emulsion. I know it smells bad, but it'll only smell bad for a day or two. And then when you go to put it into a container, if you're using a potting mix with no nutrients in it already, go ahead and put some sort of dry vegetable fertilizer, something that's 3-4-3 or 3-5-3, or keep it below 5 in any one nutrient. Mix that in per the manufacturer's recommendations. If you are using like an actual potting soil with fertilizer already in it, don't add any more. And then wait 2 to 3 weeks for the plant to establish itself in the new pot before fertilizing for the first time. And then fertilize every 2 weeks, or every 2 weeks. If your leaves start to curl a little bit, they might be getting too much fertilizer. So you might want to, step back. It's kind of you can add too much and make the plant mad.
Awesome. That's really helpful. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
I just had one other question just about, you talked about doing the 10% bleach water. I've also heard that you can use hydrogen peroxide to sterilize your trays. Is that something you ever use, or is there a reason you would go with bleach over something else?
I went with bleach just because I'm paranoid and I wanted something that was absolutely going to nuke whatever was living in the pots, because I had some significant issues with viruses last year. So I wanted to make sure nothing was alive, basically. But peroxide would probably work. I mean, it's still a pretty good disinfectant. The nice thing about bleach is you can don't buy whitening bleach, buy specifically sanitizing bleach. Learn those are two very different things. Unscented sanitizing bleach, in a bucket, and keep it in the garage if you don't want to deal with the smell, and it generally works. You don't even have to scrub the pots clean. They'll clean themselves as they sit in the bleach, and so you don't have to scrub a bunch of tiny little pots. I did not do that with these. I scrubbed them out by hand and then found out I could just throw them in bleach and let them sit and didn't have to scrub them.
Next year, you'll know.
Yeah.
Perfect. Do you use a timer? You mentioned 14 to 18 hours of light. Do you have yours on a timer?
Yes, I do. And, you can buy I probably shouldn't plug a surge protector into a timer. I can't recommend that, but getting a simple, whether it's a digital or the ones with the push button, I would recommend getting a timer. That way you don't have to remember to turn your lights on or off. They'll just kind of do it themselves.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, that was great. I'm excited at the prospect of a trellis workshop as well.
I know I opened my mouth there, but it's needed. It's needed.
I would love that. I would love that. Well, thank you. At this point, I'm going to hit stop on the record.